So, it's now March. It's the third month of our brand new decade, and we're just days away from getting our hands on a third, true, full-length Half-Life game. We have all been waiting for close to 13 years now for this moment. That's literally half of my whole life waiting for a new Half-Life experience. Valve clearly takes their time with this stuff, and I'm sure that Half-Life Alyx will blow away the world just like Half-Life 1 and 2 did. But what if I was to tell you that Alyx won't just change gaming this time around? What if I told you that this one game is the start of something much bigger? Now please, hear me out on this, because it will get a little confusing. But this will hopefully finally satisfy your thirst of finding out where Half-Life 3 went, and what Valve has been up to throughout the last decade or so. I have waited a long time for the right moment to make this video. First of all, I wanted to see the first actual gameplay of Alyx before really getting confident enough to make this. I needed to make sure that the game was actually what I was imagining it to be. But more importantly, I wanted to see if my 3-year-old theory about what Valve was up to was correct. And now, just a few days before Alyx's imminent launch, I think my theory was just confirmed by Gabe Newell himself. A few years ago, Valve started showing interest in brain-computer interfacing. They were talking about some crazy stuff, like feeling and controlling parts of a video game with a player's brain, by putting augments into players' motor cortex and visual cortex to amplify gameplay. They were serious about this stuff, even going as far as hiring an experimental psychologist to help them. Now, how does all of this connect to my theory and the upcoming release of Half-Life Alyx? The answer, I think, is in what Valve knows best. I'm of course talking about time. More specifically, what we now know as Valve time. To really explain why I think Alyx is about to change everything, let's begin by talking about how we got to where we are now. The reason it took so long to get Half-Life 2 made was because of all the innovations about us. The original Half-Life was all about storytelling in a brand new way for shooters at the time, with set pieces and gameplay that never took you out of the first-person perspective. It was genuinely fresh and blew away the gaming world at the time. Then, 6 years and a generation of technology later, Half-Life 2 had to do something just as groundbreaking to wow us. And it sure did, introducing physics and facial animations above all else at the time. With Half-Life 2, Valve even managed to change the gaming marketplace itself, by pretty much forcing us to embrace Steam. And while many of us were understandably hesitant at first to go all digital, we got used to it pretty fast. And now Steam is the go-to place for buying and playing games on PC. All of this is why Valve is now known for pushing innovations with everything they do. I can go on and on about how, for example, Portal transformed first-person puzzles, or how Team Fortress 2 unfortunately created microtransactions. What I'm trying to get to here is that anything Valve releases either changes the gaming market, or changes the way we play games entirely. But all of these innovations take huge amounts of time, and this so-called Valve time is what brings us to this exact moment and to my theory, that I have been holding on to for at least a few years now. Ever since the Orange Box came out, I was anxiously waiting for a new Half-Life, just like any of you watching this. So throughout the last 12.5 years, I had more than enough time to research Valve's work, and what was taking them so incredibly long. Half-Life 3 turned into a dream game by now for the community, almost an urban legend at this point even. It must be a scary thought for Valve knowing that whatever they would do, it would never satisfy the hype that was built across over a decade of fans waiting with pretty much dead silence. And I'm sure every developer there knows this. Valve just kinda does things its own way. And the company doesn't have any hierarchy. The way they operate is with employees having the freedom to work on anything they want in small groups. So basically what this got us is a company that decided to make a bunch of awesome projects, to then just cancel all of them 100 times over and over again across the last 10 plus years. Sounds absurd, right? It does. And it sounds even crazier without context. Valve even somehow managed to cancel Episode 4 before finishing Episode 3, even though Episode 4 wasn't even being made by Valve at the time. Now you're probably asking yourself, is all of this nonsense happening because Valve is Valve and Valve just loves to cancel everything, right? Well yeah, they can spend all the time they want making games without ever finishing them, but Valve time doesn't mean forever, and there is a certain time where they can actually agree upon something which ends up becoming a top-tier experience that changes the industry forever, of course. What I mean by this is all the cancellations I just mentioned, they aren't just all a colossal waste of time and money. Valve isn't stupid, and the greatest resource all their money got them is time itself. And it took them all the experience they got from all those failures to then turn all the time and effort into what we now know as Half-Life Alyx. It's almost hard to believe that Valve just casually announced a new Half-Life like that on Twitter, with a release date set just a few months later, Valve surely knew the fan reaction that would ensue, and this is where Valve plays it smart. I believe this announcement was downplayed on purpose, a sneaky, genius move to get a Half-Life 3-like game out without the negativity from fans that were waiting forever for a new release. This is essentially Half-Life 3 in disguise, as Philip put it in his video, which I highly recommend you go ahead and watch on his channel afterwards. Now, while our opinions with Philip are similar in the matter, I ultimately think that's just half the story here, because when it comes to Half-Life, Valve likes to bring a quantum leap in between each release. After all, isn't this what we would have wanted Half-Life 3 to be? An experience that would innovate on a grand scale that Half-Life 1 and 2 did? Well, of course, and we would have wanted even more. We waited for 13 years for a reason. We want gameplay that will have new mechanics just as revolutionary as a gravity gun gave us with physics. We want graphics that will push fidelity forward just like Source did back in 2004. And we want a world that will leave us in awe, just like we felt when we first left the train station and saw City 17 open up in front of us. Now imagine all of that, pushed further not just by more advanced technology, but by a whole new format, where the world is carefully crafted on a one-to-one, real-life scale to match each object as it is in reality, where you can feel a sense of place and being like never before. Immersion so groundbreaking that a flat screen, no matter how high resolution, would never do it justice. I'm of course talking about virtual reality. Somewhere around 2016 or so, when Valve really started getting into VR, I began thinking that maybe this is it. I thought Valve finally found a way to get Half-Life 3 out, with VR being its main innovation. And then, time passed as usual, and nothing happened. But I still held hope, and when Alyx was announced, and I finally got to see it in action, I started believing again. I started believing in that Valve magic. It's hard to impress me nowadays, but here I am, running out of my way to get an expensive, high-end virtual reality kit. And trust me, I understand all the frustration that most people have with VR. Recently, I had to move to Europe. Here, buying a decent virtual reality headset is not only much more expensive, but also much harder to get. In my country, an average full-time job will get you about $300 a month, give or take, if you're lucky. Here, you would have to work for 2 to 3 months without eating or paying rent, just to be able to afford something like the Oculus Quest, which costs twice as much here as it does in the United States, not to mention a costly PC on top of all of this. So yeah, I get all the hate that VR is getting, I truly do, because it was almost impossible for me to get a headset myself. What really sold me on Valve's vision of why this game has to be VR only is a short part of their first gameplay video, where Alyx takes a bucket, flips it upside down to drop everything inside of it on a nearby table, and then uses each hand separately to look for what she needs, kind of like searching for a specific Lego piece in a big pile of toys. This freedom to move each hand separately and look anywhere you want while doing so, while seeming kind of simple, is actually impossible to do on a controller or a mouse and keyboard. This seemed intuitive, like something you would do in real life. Valve somehow one-upped themselves and made physics even more jaw-dropping than during the Half-Life 2 reveal. The company even says that because of this new input, the new ways you interact in virtual reality literally light up more of your brain. It seems like even the simplest actions are just highly amplified in a virtual reality setting. So you could sit there, poking a dead headcrab for 5 minutes in amazement, watching as its ragdoll moves around realistically, because that headcrab, it's life-sized. And it's at that moment you are just so immersed by that simple action. So VR is amazing, but it's still not the main point of this video. And this is where my theory really comes in. All of the brain-computer interfacing that I was talking about earlier, it's not just for gaming. We're slowly moving into a new, always-on and interconnected Internet of Things era. But with 5G and AI stealing all the headlines, I really think that people are missing something much more exciting here. You may have heard of something called Neuralink. It's Elon Musk's latest project, and he's now heavily invested in giving humans the ability to have non-intrusive implants in their brain. For the foreseeable future, this will just be for people with disabilities, where this kind of technology will help them. Now, what does this mean for the rest of us? Well, Valve is actually working on something just as exciting, but for gaming. Just a few hours ago, IGN released an interview with Gabe Newell and Robin Walker from Valve, talking about Half-Life Alyx. And in the middle of this interview, Gabe starts talking about some crazy stuff. He gets into how we're getting close to entering something like the Matrix. Yeah, I'm not joking here. He literally said that with this brain interfacing technology, we are way closer to the Matrix than people realize. When I said that Half-Life Alyx had the power to change the world, I wasn't joking. Now, while Alyx might not be the exact game using the new brain-computer interfacing technology, it is the first step for Valve in bringing us there. My theory was always about how Valve was going to turn gaming into almost a transcending experience. And if Valve is about to release another Half-Life, they will do it to push an agenda of some kind of like how Half-Life 2 was a tool for Valve to get us to accept Steam back in the day. VR is just the start of something much, much bigger here. In this IGN interview, you can clearly see Gabe smiling and chuckling as he is hinting more and more towards what they are building for the future. I can only compare this to the movie Tron, where a game developer teleports himself to an actual digital world. And while of course Lord Gaben won't magically shoot us out of this reality with a laser anytime soon, it's still all hugely ambitious stuff. And I think for Valve, Half-Life Alyx in VR is truly just the beginning. Kind of like a huge beta test to see how people would feel spending 12 to 15 hours with their ears and eyes fully taken up by a video game. This is essentially a bridge to get us closer to Gabe's grander plan of probably mixing some kind of brain-computer interfacing with VR or AR, which will lead to experiences so immersive that you might forget you're actually playing a game, and I think that's the whole point. I believe this is exactly why Facebook invested $4 billion into Oculus, and this is why we are now hearing rumors about Apple working with Valve on future AR glasses. The importance of this new technology cannot be ignored. Towards the end of the interview, things get real interesting when Gabe is asked about his take on Elon Musk and AI, to which Mr. Newell replies, and I quote, "Do you really want to go down the rabbit hole?" Yeah, that's really what he said. And when asked about where Valve will head in the next 10 years, Robin Walker, who is a designer there, simply replied with, "More Half-Life." This made me incredibly excited. But what I was about to hear next really blew my mind. Walker then added that over the next decade, he expects all of this brain interfacing stuff starting to materialize, and that it will have, and I'm quoting him, mind-expanding potential. Now that's something you really won't hear everyday developers say. So maybe we will see Half-Life Barney as the next step, but this time with some kind of brain implants on top of a VR headset. Sounds scary, I know. But at the same time, kind of nonetheless incredibly exciting. I have been waiting for so long now to hear about at least something with a 3 in it from Valve. And here I am, listening to Gabe talking about things that are just so much more exciting than Half-Life. And beyond any conventional gaming really. This is some truly next level stuff here. I didn't really think that the rabbit hole would go this far. So let me finish this video by talking directly to you, the person watching this. The person that was waiting for just as long as I was for this moment to come. Ask yourself, what would you really even want Half-Life 3 to be? Let's just forget the name here. BioShock Infinite didn't need to be called BioShock 3 for it to be an incredible game. And Doom Eternal is about to come out in just a few days. Does a new Doom need a digit after it to be successful? Of course not. Half-Life Alyx will mark a watershed moment in gaming, and it doesn't need any numbers in front of it to be amazing. It is already the third main Half-Life game on its own, and I think it will do the impossible, and will go above and beyond anything we could have expected from Half-Life 3 or Episode 3 or whatever it might have ended up being called. The name doesn't matter. When you will finally start playing the game, just try to, for a moment there, stop doing whatever you're doing. Stop shooting or speeding through the level. Just try to relax and look around for a second. Maybe even sit down in the middle of your room, just taking in the sights and sounds of what's around you. Knowing this is the start of something bigger, it's at this moment you will fully be immersed in a dreamlike virtual world all around you. The last time you probably felt something like this was back when you first saw Rapture in BioShock, or first opened the doors to City 17 16 years ago. This is the power of VR, fully realized by a talented developer that just transported you to a whole new dimension with a video game. And this is just the beginning. We're about to reach something that Gabe refers to as the Matrix. I can only guess that this will lead us to almost some kind of singularity, where a gaming experience will involve you being so immersed that it's maybe impossible for us to comprehend at this point. But for now, Half-Life Alyx is already a turning point. This is a far more important moment than Half-Life 3 or any other game had the chance to be. Maybe one day when that Black Mirror-like future will hit us, we will take a moment and put away our Apple glasses and neural implants and remember that all of this started was Alyx. And that's just the way I always dreamed of it for the last 13 years now. The wait will be worth it. Thank you so much for watching this. It's my first attempt at making a YouTube video, so if you enjoyed it, please take a moment to subscribe, and leaving a like or comment would really mean the world to me as I'm trying to get more videos out there. I have a lot of stuff I would love to discuss with the world. One of those upcoming videos will delve deep into why I think Half-Life Alyx is a prequel, while also secretly moving the story forward for an eventual Half-Life 3, and how this will result in VR becoming mainstream.